It's absolutely great to be here in the square in Dungarvan. I spent 5 years in the Mersey, as it was at the time, and travelling in and out on a rickety bus around Ballinroad and Ballinacorty and Ballyvoyle until I eventually got home to Stradbally. So it's absolutely wonderful to be here today with you. I really only have a couple of simple messages, and the first one is that it's a time when we need to have courage. There never was a civil rights movement in history that didn't meet opposition and that wasn't pilloried in the media. And in the same way, every civil rights movement, from the movement to end slavery, to the movement to get votes for women, to the movement to get full human rights for black people, was told it can't be done. It's not possible. We have to do something else. And we're being told that there's no option except to legislate for the X case and that we've had our chance at referenda. And there's absolutely no basis in Irish law or anywhere else for that argument. Any government faced with an interpretation of the Constitution that it finds problematic has the right to promote a bill to amend the Constitution in order to overturn the damaging effects of that judgment. It happened with bail. It happened with cabinet confidentiality. Various governments have had no problem whatsoever asking us the same question twice within 18 months, as in the case of Nice and Lisbon, until they got the answer that they wanted. And if it hadn't been a wet evening in the west of Ireland during the divorce referendum, and if it had passed if it had failed to pass by less than 2%, as it did, instead of going the other way, where it passed by a tiny margin, do you think that people would have had any hesitation of asking us a third time to vote on it again? Absolutely not. So it's nonsense to say you've had your chance and that you've had 2 referenda. It's nonsense, and don't accept that nonsense from people. And then we're being told that we have to do it because of the European Court of Human Rights. And that's factually inaccurate. Nothing in the European judgment precludes Ireland from revisiting or revising its substantive law on abortion. What the European Court asked for was that individual women would have accessible and effective procedures to establish clearly and in a timely manner their legal entitlements. They said absolutely nothing about the form of the law. Women simply have to have clarity on what's available and what they are entitled to. And there is nothing that says that we have to leave the X case ruling untouched. And you know, my least favourite argument is the one that we have to legislate because the expert group told us so. And my mother, Lord have mercy on her, used to say, when you want advice, you usually go to the person who's going to tell you what you want to hear. And that's exactly what happened with our expert group. Dr. Riley, in his infinite wisdom, told them that they had to operate within existing constitutional provisions. So very strangely, they found that we could only have a little abortion, or maybe a little bit more of abortion, or perhaps a little bit more. There was no option to revise this unjust ruling, and I've no hesitation in calling it an unjust ruling of the Supreme Court. If a law is fundamentally wrong and unjust, a government shouldn't pass it. If a law is fundamentally wrong and unjust, citizens should oppose it. If a law is fundamentally wrong and unjust, we not only have a right, we have a duty to oppose it. Legislation passed by the Dáil for abortion on the grounds of suicide would be fundamentally unjust. It is unjust, firstly, to the child, to the baby before birth. I find it profoundly ironic that we spend a lot of money passing a referendum to ensure the best interests of the child, and then, before we have a chance to draw breath, we suggest that it somehow could be possibly in the interest of a child to be aborted because the unfortunate mother is suffering from distress. How can it possibly be in the best interests of the child? It's not even in the best interests of the mother. And it's extraordinary. It makes me very sad to think the best that we can offer women in distress is that we will take away the life of your child. If you think about the implications of that, what does it say about us as a society, that that's the best that we can offer women in distress? People who are pro-life are against violence in any form, as Iona has said. Taking the life of a very small human being is violence. There is always a better way. There is always a better way than abortion. After the Oireachtas hearings, I think the politicians thought the Oireachtas hearings would provide them with a large rubber stamp that would say, oh yeah, far ahead, there are good reasons for this. Instead of which, as Iona's already pointed out, what they got was, there's no medical reason for it whatsoever. And every single obstetrician who spoke said, if a woman's life is in danger, we go in there, we do everything we can to save both lives, but if we can't, we save the life of the mother. And I don't think that's what they wanted to hear, or what they expected to hear, at least. They may have been delighted that women's lives were being saved, but it certainly didn't facilitate the agenda that they were trying to push. I'm not going to speak about the tragic case of Savita, because that has been used and abused enough as it is, But I will say this about it. The one thing we know for certain, and have known since the very first media report, was that the cause of that poor woman's death was E. coli ESBL septicemia. That was on the pathology report. We knew that. E. coli is not the bug that gives healthy people problems with their stomach and is only a danger to the very ill or to the very vulnerable. E. coli ESBL is what is popularly known as a superbug. And if people were really serious about saving women's lives, they would have been agitating for guidelines on sepsis to be introduced into our hospitals immediately. In Britain in 2007, sepsis is such a problem in Britain. It's the leading cause of maternal death in Britain at the moment. And E. coli ESBL only accounts for a tiny portion of that. But I was reading a report in a medical journal on a very tragic case in Britain where a woman died of the exact same cause, and they said it was so insidious and that it came on that the usual signs, the early warning system that they operate, actually didn't pick it up. So if we were serious about saving women's lives, and indeed Irish citizens' lives, because it affects far more than pregnant women, we would have been agitating to do something about this threat. And we haven't. Instead, our government has been pushing for abortion on the grounds of suicide, which is never medically indicated, and in the case of vulnerable women will actually do harm and is proven to do harm. I just want to talk to you for a minute about a thing called the spiral of silence. This was a woman in Germany wrote a book in the 50s, talking about Germany in the 50s and 60s, and she couldn't understand why opinion polls about elections were always wrong. And they always seemed to indicate that somebody other than the people who actually won would actually win. And what she discovered was that we are social animals. We don't like to feel isolated. We don't like to feel embarrassed. And if it becomes publicly unpopular to be associated with something, people go quiet. They still believe it in their hearts, and in the case of what she was investigating, they indicated in the ballot box, in the privacy of the ballot box. But this causes what she called a spiral of silence, because if you don't talk about it, the person next to you is not talking about it, and then you don't know that the person next to you actually feels the same way as you do. And that is what has happened to the pro-life movement in Ireland in many ways. Because there is such a relentless barrage of commentary from the media, and particularly the newspapers, I would have to say, even though I write for one myself, there's been such a barrage that people are almost made to feel that there's something odd about being pro-life. Well, let me tell you, there's nothing odd about wanting to save human lives. There's nothing odd about wanting to protect women and to offer them better options than ending the life of their child. And I'll tell you what is odd. What is odd is believing that ending the life of somebody who is small and helpless and dependent and vulnerable is somehow okay because they are small and helpless and dependent and vulnerable. That's what's odd. If you're here today, it's more than likely that you're informed about the issues, but most people aren't. They hear slogans, they hear sound bites. A friend of mine was telling me recently, to his horror, both he and his wife are very pro-life, and they were sitting watching a soap, and the issue of abortion came up. And he said to his 10-year-old son, "What do you think about that?" And his 10-year-old son said to him, I don't know what the problem is. He said, "It's a woman's right to choose." And the horror that struck both of them, and the work they suddenly realised, because the television had been educating their child under their nose. And they thought they were the primary influence in that child's life, but they weren't the primary influence. The culture was the primary influence. So we need to break the spiral of silence. We need to talk. Now, I'm not advocating you become an abortion bore. You know, the one that people run because you never talk about anything else. That actually is what they describe as counterproductive. But what you need to do is to normalise the idea that it's a good thing to be a supporter of civil rights for women and for children, and that where there's an opportunity to correct something, like if somebody says casually, you know, well, I suppose now if somebody was really suicidal, like there couldn't be any option, to say to them, well, actually, do you know that all the evidence points in the other direction? And to say something as simple as that. And that's a very simple thing that people can do. You can talk to people when the opportunity arises. You can stick slogans on your car. You can send handwritten letters. Handwritten, I'm emphasising. I know it's a bit of a bother, but they are very much more impressive. If something happens on the media that you like, you could send a positive letter requesting more. Because I know I used to work many years ago on RTE. I know that they arrive so rarely that they frame them on the walls practically when they do get them. And they say that a spoonful of honey is better than a barrel full of vinegar or something of that nature. So praise things when they are done well and draw attention to them. Coordinate with your local pro-life group here to visit your TDs and to make it clear to them that there is a price to be paid them if they introduce this unjust law. Make it clear to them that there is no demand for this, that if they think that they have to do it, that they don't have to do it. I'm going to finish up with this one point. Minister Alan Shatter said in the Dáil I think it was a couple of months ago, he said that women in Ireland were unequal because there were no barriers to treatment when it came to men. And that women could never be equal until they were treated in the same way as men. I have shocking news for Minister Shatter. Women aren't men. And the reason that we're treated differently is because we have this amazing capacity to give life. And we don't consider that to be a burden. We don't consider that to be something so awful that if you were that you could become suicidal because of it, or that if you did become suicidal because people aren't always in control of their emotions or their feelings, that the best could be offered to them is to end that life. There are so many other possibilities. Women are equal in this country, but equal does not mean exactly the same. Equal means that when we need special care, we get special care. And when we need treatment, that we get every treatment that we need, but that we also protect the lives within our wombs. There's this mythology out there that pro-lifers are only interested in the baby up until birth, and it is such rubbish. It really is. Because we are interested in life, that life be given a chance, and that life be decent and humane and compassionate for everyone. This is a time to stand up. This is a time to have compassion, and have that compassion extend to everybody. This is a time for leadership. This is a time for hope, because we can take hope from the fact that people will stand in a freezing square in Dungarvan on a Saturday afternoon when they have a million other things to do, and that 25 or 30,000 people could gather in Dublin and say, enough is enough. We don't want this. And we can take hope that history will look back and say, at that moment, at that time, they were willing to stand up and to say, there's nothing strange about caring for women and children. Thank you.